Inter Miami is off into the international break, but not in the way it would have wanted after another ugly defeat, another dreadful display, and some deserved boos and pointed words from fans. Hello everybody and welcome to the latest episode of Miami Total Football Radio, aka Miami Total Football Radio. I am one of the two co-hosts of this pod. I am Franco Panizo, and joining me as always is El Primo, the famous Primo, the beloved Primo, Steve Brenner. Steve, how are you doing today?
Beloved, that's very nice, and you like my mother or something like that. That's wonderful. Thank you. I feel like I'm 10 foot tall now, even though I'm only 5'9". But thank you. I'm doing well, better than I guess a lot of the fans. You know, the stadium was great. The stands were packed, and yet we were left devoid of any excitement or goals. Even a guy that when I was playing tennis last night, he played on the adjacent court next to me was telling his mate that he'd been to the game. He said it was awesome and he loved it and he loved the atmosphere and all that. But just the only one problem is that maybe the team stunk the place out a little bit. But I'm sure we'll get into that. But yeah, wasn't great. But at least in the stands, it looked awesome.
Yeah, no, the vibe was great. The atmosphere was electric. It's the best it's been inside a Drive Pink Stadium. Hopefully there's more days like that to come. But we'll talk about the fans and how they performed, because they performed way better than the team. We'll touch on the team's latest showing in this 3-0 defeat to DC United. And we'll touch on the MatuidiGate findings, which happened last Friday, and break that all down and explain what that might mean for Inter Miami going forward. If you're new to the pod, give us a follow and give us a review if you have not already. We really appreciate it. And of course, give us a follow on all our social media channels. That's Miami Total Football on YouTube and Facebook, and at MIA Total Football on Instagram and Twitter. But let's get to it. All right, Steve. So, as I just mentioned, Inter Miami suffered a 3-0 loss to DC United at home at Drive Pink Stadium in a game that was played in front of almost 16,000 fans. At least that was the announced crowd, a sellout crowd, due to still some limitations that are in place because of the game operations. But this was the lineup that Phil Neville went with for Inter Miami. He deployed a new look 3-5-2 formation. John McCarthy in goal, Nicolas Figal at right center back, Ryan Shawcross as the center back, the middle center back, Christian McCoon as the left center back. The right wing back was Lewis Morgan. The left wing back was Jovan Jones. You had Gregori at the 6, and serving as joint number 8s were Victor Ulloa and Blaise Matuidi. So up top, you also had Julian Carranza and Gonzalo Higuain as the joint number 9s. That formation, we'll touch on that in just a little bit, but obviously Inter Miami loses this game 3-0. They gave up 2 goals in the first 21 minutes. Ola Kamara scores first in the 15th minute. That's followed by a Paul Arriola goal in the 21st. And then Ola Kamara gets his second of the day, of the night, in the second half, in the 71st minute, off a great cross from Paul Arriola. 3-0, pretty emphatic victory for DC United, which had been in a bad way, and a pretty poor way for Inter Miami to go into this international break that will give them 21 days in between games. Steve, watching the game, what were your initial takeaways, or what are your takeaways or your thoughts after the game?
Yeah, I mean, again, same old problems. Can't score enough goals, and just don't look very resolute at the back. I just think that they just the lack of pace at the back seemed to be really, really troubling them. Shawcross looked a bit off it. Bad marking was in it for the third goal. I just think once they let in those 2 goals, they were pretty much deflated. And then I don't really remember them creating anything of any note at all, really. A few sort of half chances, but nothing really. It's just frustrating, isn't it? They look like they're on the way to sort of getting something right, and then they keep taking 2 steps back. So I just think, if anything, this break has probably come at just the right time, just for them to reassess and regroup a bit and make some changes. As we say, the transfer markets are open now. But yeah, on the whole, defensively, it's just a lack of pace, isn't it? I think, and they were caught out, and I think DC were good value for the win.
So for me, the overall performance was obviously not great yet again. I think we saw a little more fight, a little more energy than we did in that Chicago Fire loss. That was very, very poor from a performance standpoint. Obviously, the result in that one wasn't as lopsided. The final result wasn't as lopsided as it was here, but I thought the performance in that Chicago Fire game was overall worse. Thought they showed a little more in terms of those two elements, but just still not good enough. Still very, very, very subpar from the highest paid team in MLS, or the most expensive team in MLS. And the fans got into it, and again, we'll touch on that in a little bit, but the fans clearly expressed their dismay and displeasure with what they saw in front of them and what's been building, because like you just touched on, at this point it looks like the team's regressing from where it was initially in the season, when defensively it was solid and or at least better than it is now, and they were getting some goals. But at this point it seems like the team's regressing because they're not scoring, they're surrendering goals, they're playing very poorly, and they're doing so against some of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference, which to me is very concerning because you're not even playing the top teams yet, and that is still to come later on in the schedule, including the second game back from the international break against Orlando City, your rival. So there's a lot to be concerned about if you're Inter Miami right now. I will say, while the players did not perform in this one, I think the tactics, Phil Neville's tactics, were all wrong from the start. I understand the idea between trying something new and looking to find a solution to the troubles that they've had in terms of the build out, in terms of being high pressed, but the 3-5-2 just did not work for them in this one. They surrendered those 2 goals in the first 21 minutes, and then he changes the formation back to the more customary 4-2-3-1 that they've used. And to me, that's a clear admission that his tactics just did not work. And again, while I put the result and the defeat on the players for not performing, I also put it on him for putting the players in a position to not succeed, because that 3-5-2 just did not work. They couldn't defend the spaces in behind, the wide space in behind. Lewis Morgan and Jovan Jones are not wingbacks, not natural wingbacks. They were tasked to do so, and they couldn't perform the necessary defensive functions. The second goal, you see it clear as crystal, and there were other plays before that were leading up. There's one that I think Paredes smashes over the crossbar from in close, and he was wide open because he made a trailing run and nobody picked him up. There were multiple plays. There were multiple plays leading up to the first goal, and you were like, "Oh man, DC United's going to get on the board," and they eventually did off of a mistake from Nicolas Figal when he was trying to build out to Gregori. But again, overall defensively there were some shortcomings, but I think tactically in this one that was the bigger deal.
Well, look, I mean, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. He doesn't try and change it, and then people say, well, why didn't he change it? He changes it, and at least I guess it didn't work. He knew that. He tried to change it again. It was probably too late. I mean, if you look at the Champions League final, where Pep Guardiola completely changed the whole shape of his team, actually didn't play with a striker or a holding midfielder. Coaches try things. Sometimes they come off and they look like a genius. Other times in this particular instance with Phil Neville, he tried it, didn't work, changed it again, didn't work anyway. And so, yeah, you can be harsh in terms of, the formation didn't work, but you kind of, at least you try to change something. But I just don't think he hasn't got the players.
Mm-hmm.
He hasn't really played like that as well. And he wanted the wing backs to get forward, and then they could supplement the midfield. But I don't know whether or not a lack of pace at the back is kind of holding them back a little bit. And Shawcross was badly out of position for that third goal. He was in no man's land really. So yeah, just symptomatic of a team that's just not functioning in all departments. And I think if you just had a player, a DP that was on his game, Higuain or whoever could just grab the game by the scruff of the neck and really lead the team on, then at least you would have some sort of crumb of comfort. But he didn't do that. None of the other ones did either. So you're kind of left with a bit of a mess, really.
Do you have your Manchester United 1992 pajama pants on again? Because
no, I'm
not surprised.
I did watch an Alex Ferguson documentary last night, which if anyone wants to watch it on Paramount Plus, I'm not getting any payment from Paramount Plus. So they want to pay me, I am available.
Yeah, the pod will take the sponsor if it's available.
So yeah, look, no, I'm not just excusing him saying this. I'm just trying to spell out if you're a coach and you're trying something out. You try it, okay, and then if it comes off, you're brilliant. If it doesn't, you look silly. I mean, I'm not saying you look silly, but I mean, it's obvious that you had to change it around because it wasn't working. So what do? Do you criticize him for changing it? You criticize him for getting the wrong tactics? Did you fall somewhere in the middle? I mean,
yes, you criticize the coach for getting tactics wrong, just like you criticize a player for missing a shot.
And I'm sure.
Look.
Hold on. I'm just sure if he was sat here, I'm sure that he'd fess up and say, "Yeah, I got it wrong," or "It didn't work. We tried something, it didn't work." I mean, it's just that's football.
Well, unfortunately, Phil Neville was not asked about his formation and initial tactics in this one after the game, but he did say that he took responsibility for this. And look, before we listen to his quote, his post-game quote that I think is something that the listeners should hear, if they haven't already, the performance was poor. And this is at home against one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference that has been struggling, and you got blown out. This is not a game. Look, the players are ultimately the biggest protagonists, and they are the ones that mostly determine a win or a loss. I think we can agree on that. But this is not a case of Gonzalo Higuain missing a penalty kick in the 90th minute, or John McCarthy bobbling a ball in the 55th minute against the run of play in a match that Inter Miami was dominating. Inter Miami was once again outplayed by and large, and this time they just happened to give up 2 early goals as a result of this formation that just did not work. So that, to me, is absolutely on Phil Neville. The changing of going back into the 4-2-3-1, him saying, all right, well, this didn't work. I have to go back to what they feel most comfortable in to try to manage the situation before we get blown out or see if we can get back into the game. That's a clear admission that his tactics were wrong. But let's listen to Phil Neville, not talk about the tactics, but talk about his responsibility in the current situation with the team.
What I'm a big believer in, and I won't change, and it's one of my non-negotiables, is that ultimately the buck stops with me. The buck stops with me in terms of sort of like, that is my team out there, and we play together, we win and lose together. And ultimately, at this moment in time, we are suffering, and we're suffering a lot, and we're frustrated with what is happened in the last 3 or 4 games. But ultimately, now's not the time, 9 games into the season, to start pointing fingers at individuals. We've got to be better as a collective unit. We've got to make sure that we play better, and that's the way it has to be.
Okay, Primo, listening to that, are you still going to say that darned if you do, darned if you don't? Because, like you said, when coaches make changes, right, it's obviously with the idea to better the team. So obviously, I'm not saying he did this to worsen the team intentionally, but I think he got it wrong in terms of his tactics. And when you do that, you're going to get criticized. Just like when you do it and things play out or come off well, then you get praise or you get plaudits. And again, this is not just a one-game situation. They've been playing poorly for several weeks now against some of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I mean, but he admitted that, didn't he? He sort of did held his hands up. I'm culpable. The buck stops with me. That's my non-negotiable. The buck stops with me. He that's why he's in charge. He tried it. It didn't work. I mean, it just didn't work for one reason or another. It didn't work. I think it's the personnel. The players aren't playing well. He's chopping and changing it a bit. I think because he's trying to look for solutions for something, when the only solution is to get a clean slate, and he could just wipe all the players off the roster and pick a whole new roster, which obviously you can't do. So he's caught between a rock and a hard place. Really, you've got to deal with what you've got. This is where his coaching acumen comes in. This is why he's paid money to come and coach the team. Can he do it? It really is. The ultimate test for a coach now. You've got to deal with. It's like anything. The people you sell. Why don't you send Pep Guardiola or Jose Mourinho to go and manage in like the English 4th division? Would they still be able to get it? Get the team up and be as successful as they are when they spend over $1 billion. I mean, it's a good argument to have to see. So we're going to see now if he's capable of doing that.
So there's something you said there that I'm in agreement with, but
shock horror, yeah.
No, but hold on. So I agree that it's ideal for a coach to lead or manage a team of players that he has by and large helped build, which is clearly not the case here. And it wasn't the case with Diego Alonso last year, and we touched on that with multiple times when it came to Diego Alonso in 2020. However, like you said, a coach is still paid to coach. And right now, I think the team has regressed from where it was at the start of the season. And I think while you could point to individuals and performances, I think coaching has also become an issue over the last few weeks. And I think I think he's overthinking things now. I think he's trying to throw things at a wall and see what sticks. He's pushing buttons to try to see what formations work, who works well with others. Because we've seen different lineups now, multiple different lineups over the past few weeks with either Federico Higuaín starting up top, Federico Higuaín starting at the 10, or in this one you had Julian Carranza and Gonzalo Higuaín as joint number 9s. Then he moved Gonzalo Higuaín to the 10 spot after the 2-0. That didn't produce a whole lot more, so he takes out Julian Carranza in the second half, puts in Federico Higuaín, Gonzalo goes back up top. Then you had, Lewis Morgan starting as a right wing back, Jovan Jones as a left wing back. When he switched the formation, Lewis Morgan occupies the right midfield spot, so he goes a little bit higher with a little bit less defensive responsibilities. Then he puts in Breck Shea at the left midfield spot, switches Lewis Morgan with Breck Shea, and they're occupying alternate wings, so Lewis Morgan was on the left, then he switches back. There's just a lot of changing, a lot of tinkering, a lot of, again, just trying different things to see what works, and I think that's not helping the team right now. I think getting back to the basics, getting back to the 4-2-3-1, and changing personnel is probably his safest bet to improve going forward, because like you said, he can't wipe away the team, he can't change the roster overnight, and he's not going to be able to do that by and large over these next 2-3 weeks. So he's going to have to make the best of what he has, and I think going back to the 4-2-3-1, but changing some players in that lineup, including Blaise Matuidi, I think that's his best bet. That's just my opinion. I don't know if you have anything you want to add there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we don't want to keep going over all ground, even though we go over all ground every week, every minute. But I guess this is also the fact that they didn't really have too many preseason games. He hadn't had a chance to work on things. I know they work on things behind closed doors, so all this kind of stuff now is coming to roost and just leaving him with a lot of problems, which we anticipated them having. I'm not excusing it. I'm all for people like changing things around, but maybe he was overthinking it. But I think you just got to try and be in the moment, be fluid, and just try and work things out to see what happens and what doesn't. And unfortunately, he's having to experiment in games, actual proper games that mean something, rather than playing pre-season friendlies when there's nothing on the line, which is difficult. And I'm sure, as I said, if we were sat to sit down with him, he'd agree with that 100%.
Yeah, I think he's at a loss for how to get the best out of this team or what the best team is. But again, I think simplifying things for everybody and making some tough personnel decisions, I think that can help him and help the team, as much as it can. Because again,
we also don't forget. Yeah, I mean, we also don't forget this is a team that was horrible last year as well. So it's not as if he's come into like a well-oiled machine, is like dismantling it part by part. He's come into a team that were pretty bad for the 3/4 of the season last year. So they've kind of flatlined right now.
Yeah, and look, the fans let that be known. The fans The fans started booing, if not before the third goal, definitely after the third goal happened when it was 3-0. Fans started booing the team and the performance. There were some not so pleasant chants after the game in Spanish, which you can find on TUDN. I mentioned them in my post-game article for SBIsoccer.com, but I didn't actually list out the chants. The chants were listed out though on TUDN, and other outlets like ESPN or SportsCenter in Espanol also posted a video highlighting or putting a light onto the post-game chants from parts of La Familia. There are some profane Spanish words in there, so I will not repeat them, but again, you know where to find them. The gist of one of the messages, or one of the chants were, get everybody out, no one's worth keeping. More or less along those lines.
Or Phil Neville?
Steve, fans also headed for the exit doors in the 71st minute after that Ola Kamara goal. And Jorge Mas was in attendance in the stadium. David Beckham was not, but Jorge Mas was at Drive Pink Stadium, sitting there as he normally does in that front row. I can't imagine he looked at that and was like, "This is good enough." I can't imagine he sat there. I could imagine his blood boiling that something he's invested so much money into is not working out anywhere close to what is expected. Because again, 3-0 to a struggling team in the Eastern Conference. Inter Miami is now in 11th place with, again, it bears repeating, the most expensive team in Major League Soccer. and they're just not performing, and fans let it be known. Fans left the stadium. It was an ugly sight from that 71st minute onward, because the fans, with all justification, let it be known that this is not cutting it. This is not good enough for the passionate fan base. And look, I'll say this about La Familia and the fan base in general. I'm glad that they booed, and I'm glad that they expressed their displeasure, because I've covered this. I've been around this league a long time. I have seen games in a bunch of different markets, and not every fan base would react that way. Some fan bases would just be indifferent and say, "Oh, right, well, we stunk up the place, but live to fight another day." I am glad that Inter Miami fans have the soccer savvy and the soccer knowledge and to know that this just can't be the benchmark for what Inter Miami is. I'm glad that they expressed their displeasure. I'm glad that pressure is being felt. So it's not just us on the media side being critical or harping on poor performances or poor coaching decisions. It's the fans. The fans see it. The fans are reacting to it. And that absolutely has to be something that they change.
Absolutely. Jorge Mas obviously very upset. Just 24 hours after he was fined $250,000 for financial irregularity, which we're going to get to, but that's not a good look, is it? So he's also hasn't helped, or their front office hasn't helped. Yeah. So in general, it was a very bad sort of 24, 48 hours. And absolutely fair play to the fans. They pay their money. They've waited 6 years for this moment to fill the stands, and they saw something that was substandard. They've got every right to boo, and no one would begrudge that whatsoever. No, and that's it. You want to see that. You want to see them passionate and engaged and care.
Yeah.
Care so much that they want to do that. So they're well within their rights. But, people running the club didn't cover themselves in glory, and then people that actually play for the club didn't cover themselves in glory anyway either. So it was just a bad couple of days.
Primo, I like that you use the word care, because I agree. If the fans are booing, if they're expressing their displeasure and their frustration and their disappointment, it's because they care and they want to see a team out there that performs better and that gives them something to be proud about. So fully in agreement with that, because I know some people are like, oh, well, you shouldn't boo your own team. But if they're booing, it's because they care. And look, I have spent some time with Vice City before the game, saw some of their pregame tailgate, talked to some fans who had concerns about the team. And that's something I'll share here, something that I noticed before the game. Whereas in other matches, I would ask fans when I talk to them, how are you feeling about this one? Do you think Inter Miami will get the win? In previous games, the fans, by and large, that I spoke to were like, yeah, absolutely, we're getting that W today, etc., etc. This time around, mostly everybody that I asked before the game, hey, do you think Inter Miami's going to win this one? They would say, I hope so. So even the fan base is starting to be a little less optimistic about the team and its standing. But again, the Vice City pregame tailgate, the barbecue, and just the festive and passionate display was awesome. The March to the Match was a fun, good time as well. I have a video of those on Miami Total Football's YouTube page. So if you haven't seen it, or you want to see it, or you want to relive those moments, you can on the YouTube channel. Steve, the last thing I'll touch on in this game is something that I think was a positive development, and that's what I saw from Jay Chapman off the bench in the second half when he entered the game in the 61st minute for Blaise Matuidi. I think Jay Chapman made a case for himself to start in this one, or to start going forward. He brought new ideas. He brought energy and mobility to the center of the park in that midfield. Moved the ball very well. Finished with a game-high 92.6% passing completion. I liked what he brought. He also had a couple of really good plays. One where he turned in the midfield under pressure when receiving a pass from the backline, and another one where he hit a one-time ball into space for Gonzalo Higuain. Look, I think Jay Chapman has his own deficiencies and his own flaws in his game that could be pointed out or that might be seen at a later date. But I think at this point, he's probably an upgrade from what Blaise Matuidi's giving you. And I think that could be a change that Phil Neville makes, or that he should make, or should at least consider. And that's starting Jay Chapman for Blaise Matuidi, because I just don't think Blaise Matuidi is giving you enough. Matuidi was better in this game, but still didn't leave a real stamp on things, and then was subbed out in the 61st minute.
Yeah, he's just a bit more. He's like a sort of better version of like Will Trapp, don't you think? Just sort of a bit more dynamic, bit more box to box, decent on the ball, young, hungry. I think he's kind of impressed every time he's been called upon. But yeah, he's raw. But I mean, he's going to learn in this environment for sure. And look, it's going to be a big call to drop Matuidi. But I mean, when has he played well? I really can't. Maybe the first game he played. I remember thinking that he did well for like 60 minutes, but he's kind of a shadow of the player. I think they're realising now he's kind of a bit of a shadow of the player that he was back in 2018 when he won the World Cup. Keep going on about that. It's nearly come out for 3 years ago now. So he's not involved. He's not involved with the French squad for the Euros. So yeah, BP problems. I'm
going to say what I honestly think in terms of Matuidi. I think he's checked out. I think mentally he's already an ex-player. I don't think he's busting his tail or approaching things with the seriousness required. That doesn't mean he's not training or not trying to fight and play, but I don't think it's at the level where it needs to be. I mean, he's joined in on some. He recently became the ambassador of, I'm not sure if it's an agency, but something along those lines, and it seems like he's as focused now off the field, with his life off the field, as he ever has been, and there's a lot of things going on for him off the field. I think at this point he's practically a retired player that's just still playing. I know that might be harsh, but just haven't seen the performances be anywhere near what his resume says they should be. This is a player that played at some of the biggest clubs in the world, that played for France's national team during the World Cup, was a starter, not a rotation player, not someone that came in and give you 5 minutes off the bench. He was a starter on that team. That was a few years ago, but again, I think mentality and mindset and effort are as big of a thing to do with his performances as anything. Steve, I said that would be the last thing we touch on, but you've mentioned the lack of pace at the back a couple of times. I think that's something we should also bring up before we wrap up this segment. I think that was on display in this one as well. Ryan Shawcross was probably exposed a bit in that regard on a couple of occasions at least. Nicolas Figal had a very poor game as well. And Christian McCoon didn't look good at the back. So obviously there are defensive issues. That's something that Phil Neville pointed to and said that they have to correct, but they're also not scoring. So there's issues all over the field.
Yeah, it's definitely with the lack of pace. It's a problem, isn't it? Because if they're just knocking, if the teams are just knocking long balls over the top for attackers or midfielders to run into, they're going to fancy their chances of getting the ball and then getting behind the defence. So it's not good. So that means because of the lack of pace, they probably have to play a bit deeper, and that in turn invites trouble. If you're sitting too deep, you're inviting players onto you, and then anything can happen in that final third around the box. So yeah, and they were exposed during that game, and they have been exposed throughout the season with that. So that's another issue to go. Nothing is it's not a fully functioning team as of yet. I think a lot's going to depend on the trades and potentially what they can do, if anything. And I'm sure we're going to get onto how they could be completely hamstrung over the next 2 years anyway.
Yeah, well, we're going to jump into that next. Let's take a break. Let's wrap up this segment. We'll touch on the MatuidiGate findings and what that all means. We'll break it all down for you guys after this.
These fans have been amazing from day one, even going back to when they weren't even allowed in the stadium. They used to show up in wind, rain, hail, lightning. They'd stand outside in their numbers outside the stadium, and they're a true testament to this club. They are at the moment the best thing, and we need to start repaying that, because they turn out again in their numbers tonight, and they've always got our back, and it's tough when you're not cheering a team that's winning at home, and we're going to get there for sure. We've got a lot of quality in our squad. We've got a lot of guys that want to correct this. We've got a coaching staff that are very knowledgeable about the game, and the fans have been amazing, and we just need to start repaying that now.
All right, Steve, so the day before Inter Miami took the field and suffered this ugly defeat, they were hit with their MatuidiGate sanctions. MatuidiGate finally came to a close. Finally, as you had reported on last week's pod that it was coming, there was a resolution coming in the coming days. It ended up not being a points deduction, but the sanctions were hefty. They were an MLS record in terms of punishment. So, I mean, there's a lot to dissect. There's a lot to break down there. We'll try to simplify it as much as possible. Inter Miami as a whole was fined $2 million. Inter Miami's allocation dollars for 2022 and 2023 were reduced by 2.27 million. So that will be, I believe, will be split up over those 2 seasons. It's not 2.27 each year. I think that's just split up into the 2 years. Former Inter Miami CF sporting director Paul McDonough has been suspended from any MLS-related activity through the 2022 season, though Atlanta United announced immediately after this came out that they have parted ways with him. Sources have told me that they let him go, but the official language in the press release was that they parted ways. And finally, managing owner Jorge Mas was fined an additional $250,000. So we'll touch into everything, but ultimately they found that Inter Miami broke the rules. We knew that was coming because they had already said that Blaise Matuidi should have been a DP. But they also revealed, MLS also revealed, that Andres Reyes, the former Inter Miami center back, should have been a DP. So Inter Miami was playing with 5 DPs last year, still finished in 10th place in the Eastern Conference. And on top of that, they also underreported the salary budget amounts for Leandro González Pires, Nicolas Figal, and Julian Carranza due to undisclosed agreements. They didn't give any more explanation as to what that means. I thought that was very interesting and eye-opening, and I think it's something we touched on during our Twitter spaces that we did immediately after this news came out. But Steve, what were your initial takeaways? What were your initial impressions from the sanctions MLS handed down to Inter Miami?
Well, my initial takeaway was that why the annoyance of having to write and cover a story that breaks on the Friday over a long weekend when I was at the beach. But anyway, that's irrelevant. I'm not complaining about my job or anything like that, but when I'm with my family at the beach at Pompano, just about to have a beer, it's not really what you want to do. Anyway,
you're not allowed to have Friday nights off in MLS because they do this. This is an MLS trademark move. Friday news dump. They try to time it at the end of the news week so that it gets as little attention as possible and that the weekend games overshadow the news of what's happened because it's controversial. Because if it was good news, absolutely, it'd be the first thing they talk about Monday morning or Monday front and centers. But anyway,
it's the oldest PR trick in the book. But I still didn't. When I had a call on Thursday night saying it's going to be announced tomorrow. I was like, it can't be. At 3:00 when I was driving, I was like, it's not going to be announced. It's not going to be announced. And all of a sudden, I park up. It's like it's just been announced. Anyway, so look. It was an extensive investigation, and the findings were absolutely spectacular. Not in a good way. I mean, I think the previous heaviest fine for a club was San Jose was 150,000. This is a 2 million, and it's absolutely damning. That Paul McDonough, who was I remember us writing, he's Beckham's right hand man, he's pulling all the strings in South Florida, all this sort of stuff was clearly he was cooking the books. I think Jorge Mas. He's been fined 250,000 because he was on the ground and being in charge. But I think he's taken one for the team. You can't tell me that the other owners weren't really aware of what was going on. I'd be very surprised if Beckham and Jose Mas and Clare and Masayoshi Son, they must have been aware. They must have had some sort of idea of the kind of problems they were in. Obviously, Jorge Mas has taken the brunt of that. McDonough's ban is sensational with its length and its obviously the severity. He's now has lost 2 jobs in the space of about 6 months. But we were talking about points deductions and how that could affect it, and that could be the worst of what about a fine. But actually, in retrospect, that was completely wrong. And the fact now that they're going to have this money taken away from them over the next 2 years, it only works out around 25% of their final allocation, but it's a lot. That's a quarter. That's money
I believe it's that total is divided by 2. It's 12.5% of the next season's salary budget and the one that follows that the year after. But that's still a significant amount. That's still a significant amount of roster construction.
How many players could you buy with like like 1.5 million? You get 2, 3. I mean, how many players would that finance? Depending on the cost. I mean, is it a couple of players? It could be. Is it 3? It depends on the quality of the player and how much they cost. But this is all money that goes towards those signings. So that could be as much as 3 players, right?
No, you're right. You're 100% right in that this is going to probably cost them a few players, if not as early as this year, maybe next year.
Yeah, I mean, let's say over the space of the next 2 years, that's probably maybe prohibited them from signing maybe 5 players. I mean,
if you look at it like
something
that way, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
of
which is a lot.
course, they can trade assets to get more allocation money, but obviously they're going to be playing with a deficit. They're going to be dealing with the deficit. I'll say this: look, if you're going to hit this situation, if you're going to deal with something like this, one of the best people you could have leading the way is probably Chris Henderson. So I think that they're in good hands in terms of how they manage this and mitigate this, but obviously it's not ideal. This is a big dent in their roster construction going forward. They're probably going to have to move a player or two. Again, I'll reiterate that. If not this year to plan for next year, then by next year they're going to have to move a couple of those TAM level players. And when you talk about TAM level players, we're talking players like Leandro Gonzalez Pires, Nicolas Figal, players that are in that category, which are starting players on this team, significant players on this team. So
yeah, I was told that maybe one or two of those players will definitely have to be sold, which is again that's another problem, isn't it? He doesn't want to have to get rid of those players. So the fact that they're having to actually actively get rid of one or two of them isn't great, and we're not going to get this chance for a while, I don't think. But you've got to really ask, Jorge Mas. I know he's another one that's very passionate and wears his heart on his sleeve, but just from a pure thing, how did they even think they were going to get away with it? It's mind-boggling, really. I mean, for someone for a league that's so sort of on top of finances, and as we know, MLS would know what's going on with Miami's finances because they're part of the whole company structure. In Miami, the clubs are part of MLS. How did they think they were going to get away with it? It's astonishing. And Paul Madonna's been in the league for a number of years. How did he think? Well, they thought they just weren't going to notice it. I mean,
so that's brought up questions. That's brought up questions as, did he do this in Atlanta? Was this done in Atlanta, or is this something that he just decided to do in Miami to try to make it work? I mean, this is so there are other questions. There's also the questions of if this punishment is sufficient for the violations that were done, because on the face of it, you could be like, wow, those are pretty hefty punishments and sanctions. But what if Inter Miami had won something of note last year? And that's something Herculez Gomez and Sebastian Salazar touched on in their ESPN YouTube hit after this news came out. What if they would have won something? What if they would have made some actual noise last year? Then what? Is this sufficient enough for that? Would this have fit the crime? Or would you have to take away their trophy? I mean, obviously the other teams were playing at a disadvantage with regards to Inter Miami. Obviously, Inter Miami was still very poor. But anyway, those are questions that people can touch on and talk about because, maybe this wasn't harsh enough. But Inter Miami did release a press release and a statement as soon as this came out. And this is what Inter Miami's press release said. Quote, Inter Miami CF acknowledges that the club violated Major League Soccer's roster rules in our first season. We have worked closely with MLS to address these issues and have made significant changes in our management structure. Following our inaugural season, we took a deep look at our soccer operations leadership group and made decisions that not only strengthened our internal roster compliance measures, but also better positioned us to build a sustainable long-term competition strategy with the hiring of Chris Henderson as Chief Soccer Officer and Sporting Director in 2021. Inter Miami is an ambitious club with big aspirations. We believe our fan base, market, and ownership group propel us to be one of North America's most followed football teams in the world. We are committed to supporting our team and building a roster we are proud of. End quote. And anything of note in there, or is it just pretty standard for you?
I mean, they are ambitious, but you've got to play within the rules. I mean, we don't know. We haven't seen, the documents haven't been released. We don't know exactly.
And there's a lot of documents, man. There's 1,400 pages of documents according to Major League Soccer's press release.
Listen, I'd happily look at them and pore over them. I don't think we're not going to get the opportunity. It'd be very interesting to see exactly what was what. MLS have been very tight-lipped about the exact transgressions that have gone down. We don't know that, but I mean, clearly something serious has gone on. A $2 million fine. It's like, wow, and they were expecting the worst for sure. They were very worried. Phil Neville and the people that he brought in, realized quickly that there had been a mess from last season that needed cleaning up. And yeah, rightly, they were very worried about it, and they've all their fears are unfortunately come to roost. It's not the end. I mean, it's not the end of the world. I mean, like we said, it's only 12.5% of the allocation money has gone per the next 2 seasons, so they can trade and bring stuff back. But it's just it doesn't help. It's another headache, and it's just a bad look. He's talking about He's talking about big aspirations and being one of the most followed football teams in the world, committed to supporting our team and building a roster we're proud of. But it's not a good look, and other clubs will be looking at that, thinking, "Really, is that the way that you try to go about it? Is that how you're going to be?"
Oh, they're going to get those cheater label for a long time, like from other fans, from other people around the league. That's going to stick with them, and that's a question I had for you. How do you think David Beckham and Jorge Mas, but more so David Beckham, how do you think they've reacted to this? I mean, they knew it was coming. They've had to know that this was on the way, obviously. But how do you think they're reacting to the public image, especially David Beckham, who's someone that's so squeaky clean about his public image and his brand?
Yeah, he's probably embarrassed about it. We don't know how much he knew what was going on. He wasn't here. Mm-hmm. He's obviously in very close contact with Jorge Mas. Did he divulge everything that was going on? Was it Paul McDonough that was doing stuff and then they've only just found out about it? I mean, I can't believe that. I can't believe that. Maybe look, I don't think Beckham, he's got so much other stuff going on. Is he poring over contracts and looking at it? That's why he's got people in place to do that. We don't know that for sure.
Right.
But this was Jorge Mas's role. That was his thing. He was on the ground. I'm sure that his people, his lawyers, legal team, the guy is a business magnate, a construction magnate. He's probably got a very high-powered legal team around him that must have been looking over things. So we don't really know. We're not going to get a chance to answer that, to get answers to those questions. But no, I think it's embarrassing for Beckham and for Matthias Son and Marcelo Clary and these guys. It's not a good look.
Well, this definitely needs to be added. This was part of MLS's press release. It says the investigation found no wrongdoing on the part of Inter Miami owners Marcelo Claure, Masayoshi Son, Jose Mas, and David Beckham. But the press release did say, as managing owner of Inter Miami, Mas, and we're talking about Jorge Mas here, approved all player-related agreements and transactions. He was ultimately responsible for making sure Inter Miami had sufficient controls and protocols in place to ensure compliance with MLS rules, while Mas was cooperative with the league's investigation and, importantly, alerted league investigators to critical information regarding undisclosed player agreements. Investigators found that he failed to disclose his knowledge of the Matuidi violation at the appropriate time required under MLS rules. So they knew about this. Now, there's still a lot of questions, and I imagine at some point we'll have a chance to speak to Don Garber, and he's not going to be able to evade the questions forever. So I am curious to understand what undisclosed agreements were made, or what that means with regards to the player transactions, what Paul McDonough did in that regard. I'm curious as to how Inter Miami was discovered. Did Jorge Mas point the finger and come out and say these things up front? Was he the one that initially said, look, we cooked the books, and I'm just trying to get ahead of it now? Or was it something else that came through? Because remember, initially it was, it had been reported out there publicly that Paul McDonough was not subject to the investigation, and that turned out to be incorrect because he very much was.
Yeah, we suspected at the time that
it was impossible for him not to be, right? It was impossible.
Yeah. And he probably fed them, that line, and also maybe we're just guessing here, but I mean obviously he was sacked. He probably wasn't particularly happy about that. He lost a good job. Was this him kind of tipping MLS off and letting them know? But then he also let them know about something which actually caused his demise. He'll probably never work in football again. So a lot of questions. We don't have a lot of answers for it other than just, what the potential ramifications are. We don't know the real ins and outs. And I don't think we're ever going to find out, unfortunately.
I think we're going to see how Inter Miami approaches this because they keep saying they want to be a big club. They want to be a team that fights for trophies. But this is going to hinder their ability to do so. Maybe they can still manage through it, maybe so. But like we said on the Spaces, this is going to open the door for other players to step up and perform. But in my opinion, I think it's going to end up being younger players, cheaper players, because they're going to lose some of that TAM, some of those TAM level players. So they're going to have to maybe rely on the Josh Penns or Edison Esconas or other players in the academy or in the Fort Lauderdale CF team, because they're not going to be able to operate at the same level that other teams will. And another thing that should be added as well is that the end of MLS's press release said that Inter Miami has undertaken significant proactive reform efforts to ensure that the club is fully compliant with the MLS rules going forward.
Basically, don't do it again, otherwise you will be in serious trouble.
And they'll get relegated.
Yeah, you're going to have to go and play against Boca United next year. I mean, no, of course, and they're going to be in under even more scrutiny now. They're going to be keeping even more of an eagle eye on. So it's not good. The only one thing you could potentially say is that as a result of all this, it could create some sort of siege mentality within the club, like us against them. Which, and again, sorry to keep bringing him up, but Alex Ferguson, when he was at Manchester United, and I asked Phil Neville about this, he was very good at creating like an us and them. They hate us. Don't which a lot of soccer managers use. That everyone hates us. Let's go and prove them wrong. So there is an element of that, but it's not a good. It's not the good way to go about it. At all.
You don't have a Sir Alex Ferguson sponsorship deal, do you? I'm starting to think you just might. Look, last question I'll ask you on this segment and about this is because again, I don't think we've mentioned this. No players were found having done any wrongdoings according to the press release. So not Matuidi, not Andres Reyes, nobody, none of the players. However, what do you think is a best way, or what do you think is one way to mitigate these upcoming financial roster building losses? Because for me, I think, and we touched on this on the Spaces last week, I think one way is to get DPs that perform on a week in and week out basis, because that will help, raise your overall performance and maybe not miss those 10 players so much. But obviously that requires moving the ones you have in place now that are not cutting it. And I mentioned Raul Ruidiaz, the Peruvian striker who plays in Seattle, not the flashiest or sexiest name. He's not even the star striker on Peru's national team, far from it. But in MLS, he performs on a weekly basis, scores goals, gets assists, and helps that team win games. So I think finding players of that caliber or of that mold that can perform regularly, even if they're not the biggest names, I think that could be one way to help mitigate this. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, look, I'm sure that in Chris Henderson's office, he's got a whiteboard with players and their salaries or whatever their value is, and they're going to have to put lines through them. And I think, like I said, I was told that it's going to come down to the likes of Figal, Gonzalez, Perez, and Carranza. One or two of those are going to have to be sold. They're going to have to get rid of them to then create more money to spend, which can go elsewhere. So it's like I say, it's not the end of the world, but it's a massive problem for them, and they're going to have to cut their cloth accordingly, and that means losing one or two of their main guys. So it's just an extra headache they didn't need, and they're worried that they're not going. This is going to stop them from competing over the next couple of years. So we'll have to wait and see. Right now, they're not competing anywhere right now. So I mean, but moving ahead, are they able to build the roster that he wants? And it's going to be difficult because they're going to have to get rid of players now before they buy. Sorry.
Yeah, and so this has been a jam-packed segment, just like the first one was. Obviously, this is going to be a jam-packed episode because of everything that's going on. So we'll stop there. There is a bit of breaking news or some news being reported on Twitter, but I'll share that after we take a quick pause and we come back after this. Okay, Steve, let's get to the Q&A session because we have a very healthy one this week. There are a lot of questions, as you can imagine, after this dreadful performance and this poor run of form. However, like I just mentioned at the end of the last segment, there is some news that came out regarding Rodolfo Pizarro that I just saw, and it's from a reporter named Fernando Ceballos, and he says, it's in Spanish, but I'll just read it. I'll translate it quickly in English. Rodolfo Pizarro could return to Liga MX this summer. Different situations have happened or have occurred in recent weeks that have caused them not to be entirely happy in Miami. So, looks like Rodolfo Pizarro, at least the rumor mill is starting to churn with regards to him a little bit more. I know you've said that they were looking to deal him, but it looks like it's starting to churn a little bit more now.
Yeah, I'm sure his name is on Chris Henderson's whiteboard in massive letters with all his numbers, and that is definitely one they do want to move him on for one reason or another. He hasn't performed. He's probably one of the biggest earners They want to recoup some of the transfer money, and so I think it would suit all parties if he was to leave. I don't think anyone would particularly miss him. I don't think they haven't been pleased with him, certainly this season. I mean, yeah, he fits in spurts last year, but not that great. I think this is a key one for them. It's a DP which they can move on. They know he's not happy. There could just be a parting of the ways, and then they can recoup some of that money we've just talked about.
Yeah, so we'll touch on that as more news develops surely in the coming weeks. But Rodolfo Pizarro right now is with Mexico. He is training with them. Don't believe he's on the roster for the upcoming CONCACAF Nations League games, but he is with them on international duty and at least taking part in training. So Q&A time, Steve. Let's start with, and there's a few that are just directed at you, so I might just let you answer them and not chime in this time because we have a bunch. But let's go with this first one from Broski Ciderworks, which hilarious. These games are just making us drink more ciders. Franco and el tío de los primos. What do we do with our back line? So many missed marks, so many off positions. We can't handle the press. Any saving grace?
Well, we've touched on it already, isn't it? They need some sort of injection of pace, because if they play too far up the pitch, then balls are just going to be put over the top, and then players are going to run onto it, and that's it. So they have to try and work out a way to. I mean, you can't inject any pace into Ryan Shawcross right now, so it's I mean, if you could maybe, but then they could get another fine for that. When Phil Neville found to be injecting pace into. But it's a problem. It's a big problem.
Look, I know the defense hasn't played well, and I know you see the goals given up, and people tend to, obviously, understandably so, point the finger at defenders. I think, for me, just my viewpoint, the defense is the least of my concerns when it comes to Inter Miami. I think the defense is the strength of Inter Miami right now. Because, yes, they haven't had great games. Yes, they gave up 3 goals. Again, I put a lot of that on the tactical game plan, which didn't suit them this past weekend. But I think when Leandro Gonzalez Pires is back and healthy, because he has been dealing with an injury, when you have Nicolas Figal, when you have Ryan Shawcross, I think is a number 3 option for me. Although Phil Neville seems to like him as a starter. And you have likes of Kelvin Leerdam. Jovan Jones is serviceable. Brek Shea is serviceable. You've got Kieran Gibbs coming. You've got Nick Marsman coming. So I think the defense, by and large, is going to be okay. Now, if they give up goals, it's not always necessarily just their fault. There are, defending is a team effort. Obviously, center backs and fullbacks have the brunt of the responsibility defensively, but it's not just on them. It's a team effort, and you saw in this last game with the wing backs not getting back and not fulfilling their defensive functions, that puts the center backs in tough situations where they have to put out fires, and obviously they're expected to, but eventually the defense will bend and break if you're under so much pressure. So
yeah, it's not a lost cause.
It's fixing the midfield and the forwards and the functioning of the team, getting more possession, being able to play under pressure. That to me is what will help the overall state of the team, including the defense. So that's just my opinion. Okay, next question comes from Alonso El Inca Primo. Why has David Beckham not spoken yet?
Spoken since the announcement?
Since the sanctions, I'm imagining.
He's not going to want to get involved. I mean, people just tend to head into the bunker when stuff like this happens, and not just rely on the team press release to answer any questions, and Phil Neville to front out. I asked him about it after the game on Saturday night, and he didn't really say too much other than they knew it was coming and they told the players and etc. So don't expect Beckham to be out talking about it. I don't think we'll probably ever hear from him about that. I don't think Jorge Mas probably will never speak about it until the next time we speak to him, probably be at the end of the season. So they're just they want to. It's damage limitation. That's why they released it on the Friday night of a long weekend while everyone was on the beach or in the pub.
Yeah, the fact that David Beckham's Instagram account has, he's continued just going about his business on there. It's like this never happened as far as he's concerned. He's got pictures with his family, he's got pictures of himself. He's actually got a shirtless one right now. He said, "Yep, this is England. This is what we do. When the sun comes out, we take our shirts off." So as far as he's concerned, at least public persona, it hasn't happened. Obviously, internally, he knows what happened. I agree with you that it might be tough for us to get an answer from him. But at some point, he's going to make another public appearance, right, where he speaks.
Absolutely.
And someone's going to ask him, and he's going to have to respond for it. I imagine so. But we'll see.
I think, to be honest, the only way that we'd be able to get full transparency exactly what has gone down is if we actually ever see or someone is able to get their hands on the investigation, which I don't think that's going to happen, is it? So there you go.
All right, so the next question comes from Josh. Not a question, but he said Robbie Robinson injury update would be amazing. Unfortunately, we don't have an update there. I imagine that he'll take the next few weeks to really rest and recover and try to get himself back to full health. Next question comes from Preki Lives. How do you think the MatuidiGate penalties will impact the club's transfer window plans? We already touched on that. So unless you have anything you want to add there, Steve, we can continue forward.
No, all I will say is that if they get rid of Pizarro, they could bring in another DP, and who knows who that will be. So that's one crumb of comfort. Again, I've used crumb of comfort again. That possibly, at least there's a bit of movement with Pizarro. I think that's good because we keep going on about it. The DPs are the ones that are supposed to be sort of dragging the team along. They're not doing that. Who knows who they can get in with the money that they're going to get for Pizarro and to free up. So let's see what happens.
Okay, next question comes from Atlante Herons. Based off of the fan reaction Saturday night, is it safe to say the honeymoon period is over with this club? Primo, you're up first.
Yeah, I think that was over. I think the back end of last season, wasn't it really, when the team was sort of not doing great? I think, there's been quite a lot of water under the bridge, isn't there, so far now? So we're past that. Is it at the end of Phil Neville's honeymoon? I don't know. I mean, maybe. I don't think he ever really had a honeymoon, did he? He was kind of straight into it and realising quickly that this is going to be tough. So the honeymoon is long gone. The pictures from the wedding have already been processed. Everyone's back, looking at the videos and just wondering where it all went wrong.
Well, I actually
that didn't happen to me, by the way. That didn't happen to me.
I actually don't know if I agree with that. I actually think the honeymoon period is still there. I understand that there's fan frustration and disappointment, but I think the fans are still so engaged. I don't know, honeymoon period being over to me would be some people will just be like, all right, I'm not going to watch this team, which I have heard some people say.
I didn't take it as that. I didn't take it. I thought you meant the honeymoon period over for the fact that the team is new or whatever. No, I didn't for 1 minute suggest that the fans were going to give up. If anything, on the.
Well, I have heard some fans say that they're not going to go spend X $100 with tickets and parking and blah blah blah. I have heard some fans say that if the team's going to be this bad. So, I guess for some people the honeymoon period's over, but I would say by and large, I don't think so. By and large. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would say it would take a couple more seasons of really disappointing play and not contending for something like that to happen, for the honeymoon period to really end. Because the brand is big, it's bold, it's sexy, it's got David Beckham's name attached to it, so that on its own will keep people interested for a good while. So next question comes from Elder Bar. Seems like many egos out there, and Phil is having a hard time managing them. He's got a decent squad, and it's pretty obvious he can't coach a team. Is it even worth demanding his exit, or does he have that Beckham protection? Any chance we see Rodolfo Pizarro 10 soon?
No, they can't sack him. I mean, no. I mean, he is. I guess there is an element of protection because it's his friend that appointed him. But come on,
I'm glad you admitted it. I think it's the first time you've ever heard it.
It's obvious. No, of course he had. It's his, and also it's Beckham's appointment. So he's not gonna. You talk about him being embarrassed about the financial stuff. I mean, he's not going to do that. Having just appointed him with such fanfare, only 7 games ago, something like it's too early. It's way too early. And also, he's sometimes they say, teams can't be judged or coaches can't be judged until they've had a full transfer window or a full sort of season of buying players behind them. So it's too early right now. I'm not just saying that. You think I'm sort of, bigging him up or whatever, but it's too early. He has to be judged at the end of the season, but also with a proper ability to buy and sell players, which they haven't really had too much. So
and they're not going to, apparently, because they're going to be hamstrung in that regard.
What I meant is that is to have the squad of his own mark on it, and he's getting there, but he hasn't. A lot of these players weren't his. That's what I meant.
No, I agree. I agree with you. I don't think he's going to be under the hot seat anytime soon. I think the performances could continue like this, and he would not be under that much scrutiny from the leadership positions because, like you just mentioned, he is David Beckham's former teammate.
Because they're too busy scrutinising themselves, right? Yeah, okay.
David Beckham's friend and David Beckham's business partner. So, like the question is it even worth demanding his exit? No, it's not. It's not even worth it because it's not going to happen. They could finish outside the playoffs this season and he will not be let go. I could not see him being let go after 1 year. I think they're going to give him a longer leash and the type of time that Diego Alonso was not afforded. So, yeah.
But he had a season. I mean, let's look at it at the end of the season.
But Phil Neville's not getting fired after one season. I'll put money on that right now. I'm not a betting man, but I'll put money on it right now that Phil Neville does not get fired no matter how Inter Miami finishes. They could finish in last place. They're in 11th right now. They could finish in last place in the Eastern Conference, and he still will not get fired.
Sure, but the time to assess his coaching credentials or what he's done, I think, to be fair, would be at the end of the season. And even then, you still got to say, a lot of the players weren't his, blah, blah. And it depends, obviously, what happens now with the transfers.
Hey, Diego Alonso didn't get that opportunity to build a roster that he wanted by and large, and he was let go. So, but again, I don't think he's going anywhere. Phil Neville's going to be here for at least a couple seasons, if not more.
Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens at the end of the season, then we can talk again.
And as far as any chance we'll see Rodolfo Pizarro soon, well, given what we just said a few minutes ago,
you'll see him soon in Liga MX, I think.
It's looking less and less likely that he plays for Inter Miami again. Maybe they give him some games once things pick back up again because they're in a bad way, and maybe they want to raise his value a bit before negotiating his exit. But I think his days are certainly numbered with the team. Next question comes from Jorge Medina. Where was Pizarro on Saturday? Where does this club go from here after this catastrophic loss? Looking way too far ahead on this one, but predictions for the Orlando game at home. So I appreciate the effort and the desire, but I'll withhold the prediction part from Orlando because they have another game before that. We got to see how they perform in that one before we can really assess the Orlando City game. Obviously, that's a matchup between a team that's near the top of the Eastern Conference and a team that's near the bottom. So we'll see how things shape up right before then. As for Pizarro, we were told he was suffering from an injury, and that's why he was not on the game day roster. But I am not sure I entirely buy that given everything that's happened in recent weeks, given what's coming out now. I think in my opinion, I think it's pretty clear that Pizarro is not rated by this coaching staff, and that they're trying to find a way for him to move on to something else because it just hasn't necessarily worked here. But that's just my opinion. Yeah,
no, I think that's right. There seems to be like I say, a bit of movement. He's not happy. I think for both parties, it'd probably be better for him. He wants to be playing. He wants to be in the shop window. He wants to play international football. It's going to be no good if he's sat on the bench playing for Inter Miami. So
right.
Hope the agent's working. The club are working to try and move him on. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, and obviously for Inter Miami, it's not good to have one of your DPs sitting on the bench or not playing. So
no.
Probably best for all parties at this point to part ways and figure out a proper divorce. And as for how the team moves on from here, I think we touched on it a little bit earlier ago. I think simplifying tactics and getting healthy or trying to get healthier helps because, again, Leandro Gonzalez-Pires should be back when the games resume. Maybe Robin Robinson can come back. You get Nick Marsman and Kieran Gibbs shortly thereafter. They're expected to join the team soon for training. I think Kieran Gibbs was already in the United States. I think he went to a Brooklyn Nets game the other day. He posted on his Instagram story. So expect some changes for the better to happen in the short-term future. Next question, and though it's not a question, it comes from Lucho Lalo 1896. All I've got to say is we have to show up against Orlando. We need to pack the stadium. We can't lose against them. We need everyone on deck. I can go losing every other game, but not against those POSs up north. Everyone has got to go Friday, June 25th. Show up! ! So the euphoria is there for the Sunshine Clásico. I'm really looking forward to that one, especially with a stadium that can be at capacity. That should be a lot of fun. So that could be a very special atmosphere in an event.
Yeah, and another good Man United story. Nani coming up against Phil Neville. You see every opportunity. There's just
at every opportunity you bring it up.
Well, yeah, did they actually play together at United? I can't actually remember. They would have played against each other in the Premier League, so that's one preview to look forward to. Just like with Gabriel Heinze as well. Yap Stam, we've been it's been brilliant.
Manchester United everywhere. Man, the listeners either love you or hate you at this point.
I'm giving people a football education, so that's it for free.
Oh man! All right, next question comes from not a question, but again, it's a comment from Lloyd Halebrun. While I'm not sure they are worth watching anymore, just a reminder that you were going to research the Palm Beach County TV situation. Thanks. I'm still working on that. Haven't been able to get an answer for you, but Lloyd, my word to you, I will get you an answer in the short-term future. Still working on that though. But look, even the wording of Lloyd and other people's questions, as you can start to hear, the trend is that people are very disappointed, man. I'm not sure they're worth watching anymore. He says, obviously, I think some of these are in the moment. Obviously, the emotions are running high after the loss, but clearly the fan base is pretty unhappy right now. Next question comes from Gabe P. This one's directed at you, Steve. Primo, why is Neville's son playing as a center midfield when he was playing as a right back at Manchester United's academy? Can you call your sources in England and give us a proper update on how he was and what were his chances of getting to the first team? If he was a right back, why not play him there now?
Good question. I haven't been really looking into Fort Lauderdale's tactics. So I don't know why he was playing in centre midfield. He's clearly versatile like his dad, who was a fullback and then actually played centre midfield for Everton for a decent part of his career. Although his uncle Gary was a right back and didn't play in midfield at all. He's a fullback, I think. I thought when I was looking up his stuff when he signed United, it was unclear if he was a centre half or a fullback. But I'm assured that he is a fullback, but clearly a little bit versatile and can play in midfield as well. So yeah, and I think if he does well and there's an opening, then he'd get the call up. But I think Phil Neville even said in the press conference when we were talking about it that it's a difficult one for him and he's let other people at the club make decisions about his son. So it's a difficult situation for him to manage, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Look, he played center midfielder. He played as a center midfielder in the scrimmage, the final preseason scrimmage before the season started. So that's why when he was eventually signed, I didn't expect him to play right back with Fort Lauderdale CF. They have options there, so he has been playing central midfield, and I imagine that's where they project him. They project him going forward, because if he's a right back, why would you play him center midfielder? Like that doesn't really make sense. Not consistent thought process in that way, unless you saw him there longer term. Anyway, next question comes from Tank721. What does the team do now? Who do you see starting in DC? Also, Primo, what is your cocktail of choice? Martini shaken, not stirred?
Very good. Very James Bond. You know what? It's a while since it's sad to say, a while since I've actually had a cocktail. Do you like a bit of vodka and soda? Or an old fashioned, maybe? Okay. But I could tell some bad stories about whiskey that I'm not going to tell on this family show. So maybe, yeah, vodka and soda, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I've become a very big margarita guy as of late, as I know you know, Steve. So I know the question wasn't directed at me, but margarita is probably my cocktail of choice right now.
Not margarita pizza, just to be clear.
No, yeah. And as for what does the team do now, I think we've touched on it a couple of times now, so we can skip that part. And who do you see starting in DC? We'll wait till we get a little closer to the game, till we do a proper podcast previewing that match before we do that. So let's move on, because we still have a few more questions. I think we only have a couple more. The next one comes from Don Cafecito. Was hoping to see Ascona play more next match, given how crap the team has played. I stopped there because there's a profane word that I will not share on this family show. But the question continues. Instead, he was sent back to Fort Lauderdale. My guess is Henderson has something in the works and will sign a new player or bring back Mabika to fortify our awful back line. Thoughts? So I think they're just sending him to Fort Lauderdale so you have to get games and to get a rhythm and get more playing time, because obviously Inter Miami's off for the next few weeks, so they're not going to be able to give him minutes, and he hasn't been getting all that many minutes in the recent games. So I think this is an opportunity for him, a young player, to continue to develop by playing games with Fort Lauderdale. So you have the benefit of having a USL League One team right in the same backyard.
Yeah, Yeah, it definitely helps. That's why it's such a good setup, and it just enables them just to mix and match. But I mean, I guess effectively it just works as an old school sort of reserve team, doesn't it? Really, but yeah, it gives them more options for sure.
Yeah, and it helps groom him maybe for the future because, again, going back to the targeted allocation money hit they're going to take in the next couple of years, they're going to need other players to step up. So someone like him might have more of an opportunity, and grooming him now and giving him some more playing time now and experience might be able to help them going forward. Also, if you haven't seen Mitch Curry's goal from the Tuesday night game, check it out. It was a really good goal. Really good goal. Some skill, some speed, and some composure in the box. Stuff that we haven't really seen from Inter Miami by and large. So maybe Mitch Curry's one to keep an eye on. Last question, I believe, comes from Prison Mike. And he says, I'm baffled how this club can just spend on players blindly without having a coach. Then we don't get the coach they want, and we end up getting a great coach with a team that wasn't his. We still made the playoffs. Yeah, I know the circumstances, etc. Then gets fired. We get rid of so many players with a new coach, and he can't seem to find a way to make the most expensive MLS team work out a decent game. Not asking to win every game, but we are getting embarrassed out there. Now, we know most of the fault is the coach, but does he survive the chopping block?
Well, hold on. Let's just go back right to this, like the start of last season when Paul McDonough was in charge without actually a coach, and he bought a load of players. And so this obviously created like a sort of snowball effect where we've now got to the point where a season and a bit in, the team is struggling pretty much off the bad business that was done initially to create. And that was all exacerbated because there was such a rush, wasn't it? The stadium was being built, the team's being built. There was no manager. Diego Alonso wasn't appointed until the January. I mean, he was recruiting players from August. So what went on in that period? We're finding out in dribs and drabs now, but what went on in that initial period wasn't good, and that has had a knock-on effect for the whole thing. I'm not excusing anyone, but like the coaching staff, but that's what they were dealing with. And so when you look at what's actually happened and gone down, it's remarkable, really, the mess they got themselves into. And thinking now, actually, that Paul McDonough was in charge for 3 or 4 months of that period. So, God knows what went down.
So your answer to the question is?
My answer to the question is just you take that into consideration when you're looking and trying to completely sort of, hammer, the coaching staff or the players or whatever right now. Yeah, they're not doing great right now, but they were dealt, I think, a pretty bad hand to start with.
Look, I'm going to ask you this. If you had to give me a percentage, I'm going to put you on the spot, Steve. But I think people will want to hear your answer, and I want to hear your answer. Mm-hmm. You can plead the fifth if you want, but I don't think listeners will take well to that. How much? Give me a percentage of how much of what's going on right now you put on Phil Neville.
Just in general throughout the whole team?
Yeah, just the recent results, the recent performances.
I mean, you can't put a percentage on it. I mean, I don't know. I guess maybe 15%.
15%. Okay. I'd give him more. Yeah. I'd give him more, but that's just me.
I mean, he's culpable, but that is what he keeps saying. The buck stops with me. To be fair, okay, fine. The buck does stop with him. He's the coach.
I'll say this, and you can chime in, and then we'll give our final thoughts. This team, and I've said this I've written this, I've said this on the YouTube channel, I've said this on other occasions. There are teams that are better than the sum of their parts, and Inter Miami is the complete opposite because on paper, the starting team should be competitive, at least a team in the upper half of the Eastern Conference. And right now, we're 8 games into the season, and Inter Miami is in 11th place. Is there time for them to turn it around and change things? Absolutely. But I don't think any of us had a team going 2-4-2 through the first 8 games. We're almost a quarter of the way through the season, if not at a quarter of the way through the season. So clearly that's a big strike. They've been losing to some of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference, and not only losing, but getting outplayed by some of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference, despite having the highest paid team, the most expensive team in MLS. That to me is concerning. That to me is more than just players. I think that coaching comes into the part now because they should be further up in the table right now. And the last few games, at home, away from home, they've been consistently very poor. Now, we can say the DPs aren't performing and all that, but at the end of the day, the coach still has to get the most out of all of his players. And it's not just on the DPs. Practically no one is performing well right now. Very few players are performing well right now, and that's not always just on the players. That also goes to the coaching staff and the work that's being done behind the scenes.
He said a couple of times now, we need to do better. I need to be better. You know, that's it. I don't think he's not. He doesn't shy away from admitting that they're making mistakes. I do think they were dealt a bad hand, but I'm not looking to excuse them. But it's just, I think it's a culmination. It's just like a mad connection of everything. We were hearing obviously last year that what a mess behind the scenes it was, and they couldn't believe what they were seeing, and just all these things, they all just add up, don't they? I think it just sounds like it's a tumultuous sort of ever-changing environment they're dealing with, and just, you know, bombs keep being dropped, and it's just like, wow, you know, what they're going to do now. So you know, all parts of the franchise have kind of been affected by everything else that's gone on. That's not excusing anyone. That's just a fact.
Okay, well, that does it for the Q&A session. It was a lengthy one, and this has been a lengthy pod. So, Steve, let's wrap up with our quick final thoughts, and we'll call it a week.
Listen, look, I know the fans they're upset and every right to be. They've got every right to boo. You know, like we said, we like that. I just think it's still early days in the season. The signs haven't been that great. I do think, and I'm just hoping that if this Bizarro thing can go through, and they can bring in a DP that can actually pull his weight and actually contribute, then that potentially you may see something a bit better. So let's see what happens over the next few weeks. But everyone else, keep singing, keep going mad, but just stay calm.
Yeah, look, I like that the fans are demanding. I know I said that earlier on the pod, but I'll reiterate that. I like that the fans are demanding better performances and better results, because this is a team that was sold to them as being one that would be elite in Major League Soccer, that would compete and contend for titles right off the bat, that would be near the top of the table. And instead, they're getting a team that's at the bottom of the table, that's losing games on a regular basis, and being outplayed by and large, not only just being outplayed, but being outplayed by and large by some of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference. But my final thought is this. Anyone that's followed Inter Miami, be it media, be it fans, be it Inter Miami faithful, anyone that's followed the team in recent weeks has been subjected to a lot of bad soccer. Very few goals and emotions in the attacking third, a lot of frustrating mistakes on the defensive third, poor play in the midfield. So there's an international break that we're about to go through. There will be international games. Enjoy them. Try to watch them. Take them in, be it on the computer or on the TV. Take them in and enjoy them, because there should be some good soccer on display, be it CONCACAF Nations League or CONMEBOL World Cup qualifiers down in South America. I'm really looking forward to watching Peru play on a personal level. They get to play Colombia on Thursday, so I'm looking forward to that and hopefully seeing some goals and some good soccer. But that does it for this week's pod. As always, make sure you give us a review, please, if you haven't already. We'll try to be back next week if we can, if there's enough things to talk about, but Inter Miami might not have much availability, especially since they'd said that it would give some players some time off to decompress. So not sure if we'll be back next week. If we're not, we'll return in 2 weeks ahead of the game against DC United, but we will try to return next week if there's enough to talk about. For Steve Brenner, I am Franco Panizo. Thank you so much for listening to this jam-packed episode of Miami Total Futbol Radio, and we'll talk to you guys all again soon.